Hi everyone, I'm Fuad from Indent, and welcome to What's Next.js, an online meetup for the Next community. Last month, NextConf reminded us why we're so excited about Next.js as a technology and ecosystem. There were so many incredible new updates, feature releases, everything from a new build system with SWC to middleware and React server components in alpha. Even with all those exciting updates, we still felt like we were missing all the other conversations from Next.js events in the past. Like hearing from other attendees, speakers, and sponsors how well-known brands were migrating to Next, upcoming RFCs that are further down the horizon, or new tools that we haven't heard of yet that seek to reinvent core development workflows. That's what we're aiming to capture with this event series. We'll start today with Lee Robinson, the head of developer relations at Vercel, talking about Next 12 with Natalie Marlaney, an engineer from our team here at Indent. Then we'll hear Jack Hanford, an engineer at Lattice, how they performed a major migration to Next in just a few months. Natalie and I will discuss an in-flight request for comments, Next Stories, with out-of-the-box storybook config for all Next.js components and pages. Finally, we have a very exciting sneak peek into the future of web application build systems with Jared Sumner talking about bundling with Bun. Our goal is to cover what's coming up next in the Next.js community. I'm incredibly excited to welcome you all to this event. Before we start, I just want to remind you of our code of conduct, to be positive and welcoming, to respect others, and to learn together. We'll stream talks live on YouTube and host a Q&A over Discord and YouTube comments. If you have any questions during any of these talks, please feel free to just drop it into the chat. After the event, we'll post the recorded sessions on YouTube so you can watch them later or share them with your team. If you'd like to speak at a future Next.js meetup, please go to the link at the bottom of your screen, whatsnext.js.org, and click Apply to Speak. With the introduction out of the way, let's hand it off to Lee Robinson and Natalie Marlaney for a deep dive into Next 12.
Hello, I'm Natalie Marlaney. I'm a software engineer at Indent, and joining me is Lee Robinson, who is the head of developer relations at Vercel, the company behind Next.js. So I wanted to ask Lee, how was the response to Next.js Conf? How's the team feeling about adoption?
Hey, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and talk more. And yeah, just dive into Next.js 12 and talk about Next.js Conf. So far, the response and adoption has been really great. I think people are excited, most notably, I would say, about performance improvements. Everyone loves and just update their tools and make them be faster without having to do any work on their side. So a lot of people are excited about that. I'm personally really excited about that as well, too. And I think just overall, the whole community is continuing to grow and get really excited about building Next.js apps, building React apps. So it's a fun time to be a React developer.
Isn't it just? I was personally very excited about the two biggest features which were introduced. So the Rust compiler and the middleware. And I wondered if you could talk a bit more about those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the Rust compiler. So this is something that we have been thinking about for a long time. And now finally actually bringing this to life. So to go back a little bit, basically, we've been working on improving performance inside of Next.js, specifically not only the performance of the output code that you write and send to your users, but also the infrastructure that makes up Next.js to help developers essentially program better and faster and get their work done in a more efficient manner. So we think about this a lot. It's the core of what we want to provide with Next.js and make it really easy for people to get their job done. And this has went pretty well, but we started to reach limits where we can only maximize the performance so much with, underlying writing JavaScript or TypeScript code just due to the nature of the language. We can fine-tune those knobs a lot and really squeak out bits of performance, but to get the exponential performance jump that we wanted, we needed to switch some pieces to a native or lower level language that can output native code. So that could be a language like Go or C++ or Rust. And we chose to use Rust because we love the community. We have hired some amazing Rust developers, notably KDY, who is the creator of SWC, and Maya, who worked on Parcel. And they've helped bring this amazing expertise to help us rewrite parts of our infrastructure, namely compilation and minification in Rust. Now, the longer term vision here, and we can talk about this a bit more, is that eventually we can probably take over all pieces of that infrastructure and have it be rewrote in Rust. And what that means for developers is that they can update to the next version of Next.js and get basically performance improvements out of the box, makes it easier for them to get their work done.
Getting my work done, indeed. I was reading through your blog where you'd written a blog post recently about kind of Rust being the future of JavaScript and JavaScript infrastructure. And yeah, you were talking about how eventually Next.js could be written, or the tooling could be written in Rust and distributed as a statically linked binary via NPM. And yeah, I was just wondering about your thoughts on, I guess, the future of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in my ideal scenario, I decided that I want to build a web app, and I'm a brand new developer, and I get started on my web development journey, and someone recommends that I want to use Next.js, that you should use React to build on the web. I say, okay. So I go to nextjs.org and I download Next.js rather than npm install it. So I'm downloading this binary that might not even require me to have npm installed. I might not even need Node on my machine to run this. And there's no Node modules then. So I download this binary, I type in, next dev to start up my server. There's no installation warnings because of, the cascading chain of npm packages that might bring in something. There's less risk of security vulnerabilities by, external npm packages that could get compromised. Side note on that is we do actually inline some dependencies that we rely on such that that can't happen. So rather than having it just dedicated on npm, we actually take the code that was in the package, inline it in Next.js, and put the proper attribution to those people such that it's more safe when we update packages. But imagine we didn't even have to think about that. Imagine you can just run your app, it's faster, and you don't have to worry about Node modules. That's the world I think that I want to live in, that I would like us to get to eventually. So it's exciting to think about.
Yeah, I hadn't ever thought about it like that before, but it's when you say it sounds obvious and exciting. I wanted to ask, speaking about the future, are there any kind of sneak peeks or anything you can say about where you think things might go for Next 13?
Yeah, so specifically on Next 13, we don't have a great idea of like what the next breaking change would be that would cause to have a version bump. But I think first, just to talk about with 12, I think we addressed a lot of outstanding bugs that had been open in the for a while, which is really nice. And we also, and I can talk more about middleware because I know you brought that up, but introducing the concept of middleware also allowed a lot of developers to essentially self-serve and fix a lot of bugs that they had been seeing. So maybe there was something that was kind of an edge case or a corner case with how something worked, and they needed that flexibility to do things differently. Middleware kind of unlocked that. So 12's got us pretty far. A decent amount of people have already upgraded, and luckily, like, the way we try to design things is to have minor breaking changes to make it really easy to upgrade. So I think 95% of apps were already on Webpack 4. So it's a very small percentage that had to actually change from Webpack 4 to 5 as they upgrade to 12. So when I think towards the future of Next.js, getting to 13 or whatever the next major thing is, one important one is, we can also talk about this with middleware, but the underlying web runtime that it uses, where it's built on web APIs, we're going to start integrating that into the rest of Next.js. So what that means is when I'm doing an API route, or I'm doing get static props or get server side props, or any of these other things that typically used to run in Node.js, you'll have an option to essentially opt in to using this web runtime, which essentially is going to run a lot faster for users and give a little bit more flexibility on how you want to deploy it. So specifically on the instance of Vercel, we can now deploy those as edge functions. So even if I want to build a an API directly into Next.js using API routes, being able to opt in to use the web runtime that has no cold boots and it's just much faster to use, that's going to be really advantageous for a lot of people using Next.js.
Oh, yeah, that sounds really good. And the final thing I wanted to ask you about was, how does Svelte joining Vercel kind of mix with plans for Next.js? Sort of, am I going to be refactoring next week? Are there any kind of touch points that you see between Svelte and Next.js?
Yeah, so we just announced that Rich joined the Vercel team, the creator of Svelte. We think he's an incredible person, an incredible developer, and we're super excited to have him on board. The obvious question that people ask immediately is, well, what does that mean for Svelte? Does that mean that we're going to convert Svelte into Next.js, or does that mean that Next.js is going to allow you to write Svelte files? And really the answer is no. We're going to keep Svelte, and Rich is going to keep Svelte as its own independent project that has its own roadmap and its own community contributions and all that good stuff. We're essentially just helping him and enable him to work on it full time. So a lot of people don't realize that he wasn't actually working on it full time. He had a job with, he already had another job as an engineer. So for me, when I see the impact that Svelte is having, I see a lot of the ideas and the exploration and the implementation that he's done in Svelte, and specifically Svelte Kit, which is like Next.js for Svelte. When I see those, I see a lot of that influencing the larger React community. Some of the new, fresh ideas that Svelte brings to the table, the React community can say, hey, we really like the way you did this. What would that look like in a React world? And hopefully bring up the larger ecosystem together at the same time.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for joining me, Lee. I hope to see you around soon. And yeah, it was great talking to you about Next.js and Next.js 12.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Hi everyone, I'm Fuad Mayton, and I'm here today with Jack Hanford, a staff software engineer at Lattice. So Jack, can you tell me about when you first came across Next?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate being invited. I first came across Next in 2015, and I was using it in production in 2016.
Awesome, and what are you here today to talk about?
Yeah, so I'm here to share the experience that we had at Lattice migrating a huge, really complicated React application onto Next.js.
Gotcha. How did you make that decision to actually move to Next as opposed to just upgrading your existing configurations? What actually prompted that decision?
Yeah, so before Next.js, Lattice was using React Router v3, and all of our routing configuration was in a single file, and it was around 3,000 lines of code. So that's where everything was, and that's where you had to go to find code. Aside from that, when you were adding really expensive like data visualization libraries on one page, it would affect the compilation speeds of a totally different page in our application.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the biggest downsides of traditional single page app development is that kind of overall bundling. Yeah, you can implement trunking, but that is usually its own beast to conquer. Right. In terms of the actual Next features that drew you in, what were some of the highest priorities? It sounds like maybe that data visualization piece.
Yeah, so on-demand entries are the big one that would really help us right there. So when Next.js will only build and compile the page that you're on during development, that's a game changer. You're able to have really expensive libraries on one side of your application, and on the other, your compilation speeds won't be affected, and depending on the amount of JavaScript you have, it'll be pretty snappy.
Gotcha. And you actually get that same kind of performance improvement in production too, with
that's right.
Page splitting. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Any other features that really kind of drew you into Next?
At Lattice, we were really big Flow users, and we had this like kind of looming TypeScript migration that we knew we wanted to do at some point. And the fact that Next.js integrates so well with TypeScript made it a really easy decision for us. In addition to that, I want to say we were using Webpack 4 and the ability to very easily upgrade to Webpack 5 and use all of those like build caching and like benefits like that were a huge sell for us.
Gotcha. In terms of actually starting the project, what did that look like?
Yeah, so the idea is that we would start with a collection of pages, and after that kind of collection was done, we would move throughout the rest of the application. However, when developers started to navigate from Next.js to the React Router application, compiling that like 3,000 line file would take a couple of minutes, and that would be a huge disruption during kind of like a developer like flow. And so we sort of realized that this needed to be a full cutover. We assembled a team of people to work on this migration full time and work through each page.
Gotcha. Wow, that sounds really daunting. Now I'm thinking about the 3,000 lines of routes, I'm sure hundreds, if not maybe even thousands of places where people were
4,000
calling the link. Okay, there you go. How did you actually break up that work?
Yeah, so we realized that we needed a type of backwards compatibility. We needed like engineers to be able to use the same APIs across their pages and have them work regardless of the routing context that they were in.
Gotcha. And so what did that actually look like in terms of making your app next to where?
Yeah, so the routing would essentially attempt to do a single page app transition, and if for whatever reason it couldn't do that, it would fall back to a full page reload.
Gotcha. In terms of unknown unknowns, because there always are some, especially in a major refactor like this.
Yeah.
What did you run into? Where was the unexpected turbulence?
Yeah, so about halfway through the Next.js migration, some of our engineers started running into out-of-memory errors. Basically, we had this custom kind of application configuration that was competing with Next.js, and the two were sort of fighting for resources, creating these out-of-memory errors. So we realized we needed to do this like full cutover, and we needed to deprecate our custom configuration and kind of let Next.js do its thing.
So how did it work?
Yeah, so we made Next the first layer of routing kind of at the edge, and we would check to see if there was an available Next.js page. If there wasn't, we would fall back to a catch-all page that would render the React Router application. Something that initially seemed really difficult for us, but turned out to be really easy, was patching React Router and adding that Next.js awareness. So we added support to React Router's link, and basically, if there wasn't a React Router context, it would bring in Next.js's like routing methods, and then it would call those.
Gotcha. And so what did that actually end up looking like? Were you using some tool to actually apply that patch, or?
Yeah, there's a great npm package called patch package, and you just call that post install, and yeah, we were able to patch React Router and like have that require Next.js.
Gotcha. What went wrong?
Yeah, so there's a few things that kind of went wrong, or maybe that could have gone better, but we sort of tried to use this kind of agile approach where teams would pick up this migration whenever they had time. Being at a startup, there was kind of competing business and product requirements, and this Next.js migration just wasn't really moving fast enough. We learned that kind of having a consistent, like dedicated team of engineers working on this was going to be the best way to do it, because they could gain the context and be thrown at some of our most complicated pages in the application.
Was there anything that made it particularly difficult? You know, in the middle, maybe there's always competing business and product priorities, and did something come about halfway through?
So during the Next.js migration, we also were redesigning our entire product, which doubled the amount of routes that we had.
Oh my goodness! So an already broad scope has now already expanded further.
That's right. Yeah, we were redesigning the application and the code base.
Oh my goodness. Well, knowing what you know now, what would you have gone back and done differently?
Yeah, so I would have removed that kind of agile async work stream bit in the beginning, and just have a set of one or maybe a couple engineers working on the migration. Let's see, a lot of product teams simply didn't have the bandwidth to contribute and to drop what they were working on to migrate their pages. And so getting that dedicated team would have been really helpful in the beginning.
Gotcha. And then in terms of what went well, I'm sure there's a lot of existing work that you were able to benefit from. Were there anything particular that you felt really helped change the course and the kind of speed of actually delivering this transition?
Yeah, so Next.js nearly eliminated all front-end maintenance. Just by upgrading Next.js, we're able to be on the latest and greatest Webpack, Babel, TypeScript, we were able to stop focusing on maintaining our dev dependencies and start focusing on writing product. Let's see, it took our production build times from 15 to 20 minutes down to 5 to 8 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
Yep, and then it really kind of opened the door for engineers who don't have a front-end specialization to come in and kind of operate in these well-defined boundaries and best practices and make meaningful contributions to our front end.
Gotcha. I mean, I feel like even for myself, I've been using Next for a while, and file-based routing is still feels like a godsend.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
End to end, how long did it actually end up taking to go from first lines of code on that limited product area to fully deployed in production?
Yeah, so we started the migration in November, and I want to say like 3 months later, February 1st, we were done with the migration. We ended up migrating 445 pages, and that was thousands of components to migrate. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So as of February 1st of this year, any user coming onto Lattice, they're just hitting Next.
Next.js was fully powered in Lattice.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. It sounds like a Herculean effort. How many Hercules did you have on the team?
Yeah, so we started with 2 engineers working on the project full time, and about a month in, we fully staffed it with 4 engineers. And once we did that, we were able to really hit the ground running and complete the migration.
So was there anything that helped make this migration a little bit more manageable?
Yeah, so by having a really built out design system and component library, we were able to separate what was happening in the website redesign from the routing layer changes. Other than that, Lattice used to be a single page app, and if we were able to adopt the Next server, that would have made routing to our dynamic pages a lot easier.
Gotcha. So you had some custom layer that was actually handling that routing rather than just using.
That's right. Yeah. So before and after the migration, Lattice was a static website.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience, all these lessons learned. I'm curious for all the people out there wondering, how do I convince my team to actually migrate to Next? What is the one thing that you would tell them?
Yeah, I would say to do it. Next has been a total game changer at Lattice. It's helped us kind of have a modern tech stack while focusing on writing product code.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hi everyone, I'm Fuad, and we're joined today by Natalie Marlaney, one of the engineers here at Indent. So Natalie, what are you going to talk about today?
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Fuad. So we're going to go over our new kind of recently released RFC for Next.js called Next.js Stories. And we're looking at a kind of zero config storybook for all Next.js applications.
Amazing. And so what was the backstory behind Next Stories? How did you come across the idea and ultimately the kind of pain points they're looking to solve for with the RFC?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good place to start. So it was while developing the indent dashboard, we suddenly found ourselves in need of a component library. So the code base had grown. We needed to be able to quickly see how a certain component looked like. We wanted to see how a particular kind of PR changes a component or the overall UI. And then we wanted to encourage making the UI kind of more modular, utilize more of this component-driven UI methodology. And then we wanted to reflect on our experience of creating a component library for an existing Next.js app. Because I think our experience required us to do a bit of custom config. And then also, like with writing an RFC, like we wanted to gauge the interest of the community for something like this. And we wanted to assess just how good the idea was. And we were interested in suggestions, for improvements to the idea.
Great. And so can you actually walk me through what the status quo approach is? So if, let's say, I already have a Next app, what does it look like to add Storybook to that existing application?
I'd say at the moment, like the process is pretty bespoke, maybe a little bit tedious. So you have to kind of replicate your Next.js or your Webpack or your Babel config in Storybook. And then during development, you have to have like a separate app build server running. And because it doesn't have the same performance optimizations that Next.js has built up over the years, the iteration speed can be slow when you're making a change to your app. And then there's, not to mention, actually having to go around manually defining stories for pages and for your components.
Gotcha. Yes, I feel like that's one of the most kind of painful parts of it. You already define the components, you've set up all your prop types, and now you have to go back through and actually define all the different permutations of that existing component. And so in terms of the RFC and what's actually being proposed, can you walk us through some of the major highlights?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say if you're listening and you're interested in the technical nitty-gritty, please have a look at the RFC, leave any suggestions or comments. So the way it was structured was part 1 is titled Automatically Creating Stories for Your Components and Pages. So we found the process of manually creating stories, kind of as you said, a little bit cumbersome, a little bit repetitive. And then to create a story for each component, we needed to mock data ourselves. So kind of given how repetitive it is to mock the data or create a story, it seemed like the sort of thing that could be done automatically. And then we had part 2. So this idea about browsing stories and exporting a component library. So this part of the RFC is tightly coupled with the recording stories part. So the idea is that developers should be able to easily browse recorded stories. And then we wanted to allow developers to automatically export the recorded stories. And this effectively means that we want stories automatically deployed to a feature environment for, say, a PR. And then this would allow for easier reviewing of PRs because a reviewer would be able to look and see changes between different stories. And then finally, part 3, we talk about this kind of Next.js and Storybook integration. So we wanted to accomplish kind of 2 things with this section. So number 1, kind of in the zero config spirit of Next.js, we wanted to suggest that the component library and the Next.js application should share a configuration. So this is so that a specific configuration for kind of Webpack or Tailwind kind of doesn't end up duplicated. And then number 2, we wanted to suggest that the Next.js app and the component library should share a build system. So the component library can benefit from all the improvements in kind of recent Next.js versions. This kind of strong emphasis on performance that Next.js has.
That's amazing. And it kind of feels like it's almost taking the components directory and kind of making it a first-class citizen, just like the pages directory, where you have a lot of best practices and patterns of how you actually structure your pages that you can now bring over into your components and get all the same benefits and kind of out of the box magic that happens when it comes to using Next around building your pages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it.
And so I'm curious in terms of the actual community reaction, what has that been like so far in terms of either the developers of these different systems or people actually already using Storybook in their Next applications? What's the reaction been like?
So yeah, the feedback from the community, we received very positive feedback from the Storybook devs. I learned that a dedicated kind of Next.js builder for Storybook is an idea that the Storybook team have already kind of discussed internally. We had amazing feedback from other developers. So, for example, a developer, Brian Bento, suggested exporting the component library as an NPM package, which would definitely enable kind of easier reuse of the components in other repos. We at Indent, we definitely have a use for this feature right now. And there was another developer, Eric Burrell, who kind of suggested intercepting and recording HTTP calls to eliminate annotating code, as we suggested, using a use story data hook. And this approach would be very much in the spirit of Next.js, since it would be kind of even more zero config than what we were suggesting in the RFC. And also Jeff Escalante at HashiCorp, I met with him. He was talking about SwingSet, which they've been developing internally at HashiCorp. And it's essentially a drop-in component library for Next.js projects, currently still in development, which he mentioned during Next.js Conf. And it was interesting, to see the range of different feedback that we've received and, kind of hearing how other teams have approached the problem.
Amazing. And then in terms of upcoming updates to the RFC itself, what do you kind of see in the horizon before it's really kind of ready for considering around actually starting implementation?
So yeah, like future updates to the RFC, definitely want to incorporate feedback from the community. So yeah, the publishing components as a package, automatically recording HTTP calls. Also want to address concerns that were not discussed previously. So how are stories recorded for components that have props that are not serializable? For example, if a function is passed as a prop. Yeah, so that's kind of what I've been thinking, or what we've been
That
thinking.
makes a ton of sense. And also, if anyone's watching and wants their opinion to be heard or they want to share their experience, definitely feel free to go to the Next Stories RFC in the Next.js discussions section of their GitHub repo. And I suppose that brings us to the last piece, which is what does this actually look like for kind of potential roadmap or planning to actually get this implemented and for us to be able to start using this in our own code base?
Yeah, so potential plans for like implementation of this RFC. We cannot speak on behalf of the Next.js or the Storybook teams. There's generally been like positive feedback from both core teams. As we've learned, they both had their internal efforts around this. We hope that the RFC kind of raised the profile or maybe the urgency of this issue. I think implementing all the proposed features would take some time. We think there's like a few compelling milestones along the way. So for example, migrating Storybook build system to use Next.js under the hood, defining and following best practices in component directories, and then kind of userland plugins that make adding Storybook to an existing Next.js app kind of effortless and require zero config. But yeah, we're definitely still looking for additional feedback or suggestions for improvements from anyone else who has tried incorporating a component library into their own Next.js app. So please like go to the RFC or upvote it or share your experience, share the RFC with your friends, and hopefully let's improve on the state of the component library in the Next.js ecosystem.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for walking us through all that. Really appreciate it. And again, super excited to hear from the community. Thanks.
All right, bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fawad from Indents, and I'm joined today by Jared Sumner, the creator of Bun. So, Jared, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been working on and what we're here to talk about?
Yeah, so I've been held up in my room for the past 6 months or so, just working on this new way to build JavaScript applications. It's called Bun.
Awesome. And before we actually jump into Bun, I'd love to hear a little bit about the backstory. So, were you working on an existing project before we started working on it?
Yeah, so I was building this voxel game. It got to about 40,000 lines of code, and then just any iteration at all took a long time. Pressing save would be like 40 seconds or so, and then I would check Hacker News. And then I realized, well, okay, I should actually make the build tools faster. So at first I was like, okay, I'm going to get ESBuild to work with Next. That was the very first experiment. And I wrote this whole Golang CLI, had like a V8 isolate. It was really complicated. It was very much a wrong tool for the job kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So I was like, well, maybe I could just write a new bundler.
Gotcha. And so that transition from game engine, which I'd love to hear a little bit more about, maybe another time though, from the game engine into build system, you had this initial experiment. Is Bun today a kind of continuation of that experiment, or did you end up realizing that you actually needed to completely
what I ended up doing was I started from scratch in this new programming language called Zig, and Zig is an LLVM front end language. Basically, it's as fast as C and sometimes faster. However, it's also really fast to iterate in. So it means that Bun can do a lot of stuff while also still being fast.
Gotcha. And in terms of actually using Zig, if I'm going to write a plugin in Bun, Am I writing that plugin in Zig, or am I writing that in native JavaScript?
Yeah, so Bun lets you write AST plugins in JavaScript. And the way that works is it's like it has its own spec specifically for macros. It has its own JSX dialect, and it makes it really easy. It's like you can one plugin that already exists today is a relay plugin that lets you use GraphQL, like the GraphQL template tag inside of Bun, and that's all JavaScript.
And so just to make sure I understand exactly how that would work, I would, let's say, have a component, and maybe I'm using relay. Maybe a simpler version of that could be I have a component that's making a network call, and normally I would have to wait for that component to actually be rendered for it to then make that network call. Is the idea here that I could have that network call happen at compile time and at build time, and then by the time the component gets rendered, it already has all the data it needs? Is that a
exactly that's one way to use AST plugins.
Interesting, very cool. And what does it actually look like to actually use Bun? Are there specific cases where you think that Bun is really useful, as opposed to cases where maybe it might be a little, to your point earlier, not be the right tool for the job, that it might be overkill? What are some of the kind of clear-cut cases where you think Bun is really useful?
Bun is really good for large front-end applications using Next.js that don't have that many Babel plugins. You can't. I think over time, people will port Babel plugins to Bun, and it's going to be really easy to do that because it's JavaScript. However, it's still pretty early.
Gotcha. And I actually want to go briefly back to the choice around Zig. Were there any specific features of Zig that really kind of drew you in from building this kind of underlying compiler?
Yeah. So part of the inspiration for the AST plugins as they are in Bun now is actually based on a feature in Zig. Zig has this really cool thing that's called comp time, and it lets you run almost any code in Zig at compile time, and it just sticks the result in the code. And this is like a really a new idea for how to write. It's really cool.
Gotcha. And so it kind of sounds somewhat similar to some of the optimizations that either V8 or JS Core have been doing, where you're looking at how code is being written and how it's ultimately how it's being run, and where a lot of time is being spent. But the difference is that they're actually doing a lot of those optimizations kind of with magic. And from the perspective of the programmer, we don't really know exactly what's happening. It sounds like Zig kind of reveals those covers and really just lets you kind of work with those optimizations yourself.
Kind of. It's kind of like you can just run arbitrary code at compile time, and this means that it just allows a lot of optimizations.
Gotcha. Amazing. And I think I'm probably speaking on behalf of everyone and saying I would, well, first of all, I'm interested, and two, I'd love to see a demo. Would you mind?
Yeah, sure. Welcome to What's Next.js. I'm going to show you a few different demos of Bun. The first one is using Bun in an existing Next.js app. Second one is creating a new Next.js app with Bun. Third one is complicated Next.js app, a little bit complicated, not that complicated. And then I'm going to show you a CSS hot module reloading demo. So you're actually looking right now at an existing Next.js app. You can see I have configured VS Code to save on every key down. And as I type, it's updating. You can also, just to show you like error handling, I'm going to mess up the page, it shows an error, and then I undo, and then it immediately detects that it's gone. You can see these timings are somewhere between 1 and 5 ms, I think. I don't think there's anything slower than that. So that's using Bun in an existing Next app. Now we're going to create a new one. To do that, I'm going to type bun create next foo. Bun create is a subcommand, next is a template, foo is a folder. So I do that, it downloads a template, it installs the packages, and then it generates a bundle with bun dash use next. You can see that it ran that right there. So I go cd foo, I type bun, I refresh the page, and now we're in this next app. So just to show you, that's page's index foo, and now I'm going to type add exclamation points, and it updates. It's selected because I had selected the text before. So I'll show you really quick what that actually did. It added this npm package bun framework next to the package JSON, and that just configures Bun to work with next. That's all it does. It mostly just runs Next.js code. It doesn't do that much stuff. then, oh yeah, now I'm going to show you Buntrest. This is a small demo app that's like Pinterest but for bunnies. Bun is like a friend has a bunny named Bun, and she thought it was a good name, and I didn't, and then I thought about it more and changed my mind. So we can just get a sense for how fast HMR is. I can type. This is in like a header component. If we really want, if we wanted, we could have hundreds of these and it would still be fast. So I'll just copy paste that a bunch of times. You can see the page gets messed up, but it doesn't really get meaningfully slower, despite there now being hundreds of lines. So I'm just gonna undo all that real quick. Almost done, almost done, almost done. Okay, now we're back. And now I'll show you what HMR looks like for this. And that is, I have the script ready table updater. It just forces React to re-render and shuffle all the bunnies. And you can see it's pretty quick. This is saving every 16 ms. We can actually go faster than this. We can do 8 ms and it'll work. But humans can't really, this is at the point where browsers, it's bottlenecked by React to go any faster. And honestly, it doesn't matter because and it finished. It runs 1024 times. 1024 arbitrary. It finishes faster when it's 8 because it's 8 ms instead of 16. So it's Buntrest. Now let's look at, this is a CSS HMR demo. I use this for stress testing CSS hot reload performance. And so I have this, similarly, I have this other script that changes all the colors and moves the progress bar. We'll start at 64. You can see it's updating. It's not actually that fast, but it's updating. And now I'm going to actually increase it to be 16. And now it pretty much looks like a animation, but there's actually no animation here. This is all just from this file saving. VS Code is just a little bit slow at updating the file. You can see the page appears to be updating faster than VS Code. We can actually even go faster than that. We can do 8. You can see it's a little bit smoother even. Not that it was, yeah, you can actually maybe go to 4. It's kind of pushing it a little bit, but yeah. Yeah, it does 4. So Bun is great for existing Next.js apps by adding Bun framework next and running bun-use next.
All right, hi everyone. I'm Fuad from Indent and really excited to share what we've been doing here today and bring on some of the speakers. Let me go ahead and unmute. So let's bring in all the speakers and I'll go ahead and start with a question while we wait for some other questions to roll into Discord or on the YouTube chat. What was your first Next app or favorite Next app or project that you didn't have a hand in creating? And let's maybe start with Natalie.
Hello, Fuad. I think my favorite was when I first met Tim Newkins, who was telling me about all the cool things people were making with Next.js. And he showed me the Magic Leap website where they even had like Easter eggs within the website. And I've always aspired. I think you've made it as a team if you manage to put an Easter egg in your project, because I've certainly never done that. And it was just incredible. It just showed me kind of the potential of what someone could do on the web with Next.js.
Amazing. Well, I think we have some more work for us to get to. And Jared, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I'm curious, what was yours?
Yeah, I would probably say create Next app, just because like it made it so much easier to get started with a new Next project. and I used it a bunch of times before.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Create Next app. And I'd probably say mine actually hat tip to the Vercel team for helping us put this event on today was the virtual event starter kit. It was pretty easy to just clone the repo, add in some environment variables, even using Vercel integrations, and get deployed probably within 30, 45 minutes. Definitely would have taken a lot longer to get everything working, set it up with a CMS, and wire it all up together. Um, let's see. And then it looks like Jack is having a little bit of a spotty connection, so I'll go ahead and he just typed out his one is Next PWA, so a progressive web app, being able to use Next in the context of an actual application, as if it's a mobile app. And when you're able to build your app so performantly, you're able to really get a similar level of performance like you would inside of something like using Expo and building your entire app independently with this new model. Instead, you can just use Next and control your kind of page layout and your navigation structure using native browser APIs. Is definitely a very interesting one, and probably best combined with something that Jack had also worked on called Next Offline. So if you ever have a issue where you need to be able to store the Next app offline and have an offline mode, I would definitely recommend going to check that out. Cool. And then let's actually maybe start with Natalie for the first question. I actually hadn't put together an RFC before. I'd be curious, what did you learn in putting together the Next Stories RFC that you maybe wish you had known before the, oh, someone's saying that the video isn't working. Let me check in on that. Okay, I'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, Natalie, back to you. I'm curious, what did you wish you had known going into creating the RFC before you started it?
I definitely didn't realize how long it would take. I think it's like a good kind of 3 months of my life that went into that RFC. I think it was a case of trying to anticipate kind of all possible questions or all possible use cases that someone could have. I think as well, I'd never realized how, in something like this where it's open source, where like the storybook team kind of, the developers would be chiming in. It's kind of being read by the people who are building the thing, and that's really quite scary. I think as well, software design is hard. Trying to design things is hard. If that answers the question, I think just how much detail it would take to do it properly was a surprise for me.
Gotcha. Were there any RFCs that you looked at as a reference point?
No, I'm very blinkered as a person. I want to do this thing. I'm going to do it the way I think it should be done. I haven't managed to look, I think, at any other than the ones that kind of sometimes Tim Newkins will send me an RFC that he's been working on, and I'll quickly have a look and think, okay, one day I'll I'll think like Tim.
Gotcha. Yeah, I definitely strive to think like Tim one day too. Jared, I'd be curious to learn a little bit about, the game you had mentioned that you were working on. I'd love to hear just a quick blurb about kind of what were you working on and how did you make that decision to actually, I'm not sure if I've actually heard of someone building a game engine in Next.
Well, in general, Next is like my default for building any kind of website, honestly, at this point. And like part of the game, I wanted it to be really easy for people to join the game. So the server side rendering stuff as a way to make for really good embeds and stuff before the game was like to join the server. That was like part of where Next made a lot of sense. And just in general, because Next makes it easy to make is just like a much easier way to get started.
Gotcha. And then
that was the second part of your question. What was the first part?
I think it was mostly just about the game. I was mostly just curious to hear a little bit about that. Oh, I think you just described it, kind of why you chose Next for the game. But what was the game? What was the intention? You mentioned it was a multiplayer.
It was basically like a a voxel, uh, uh, sort of like if Minecraft, but uh, make it really. It was like the start of the pandemic, and uh, basically, if you made it in theory, if you made it much easier to if Minecraft was like 10 times easier to join as like ephemeral websites, then people could just it would become like a hangout thing instead of like this thing you dedicate time to. Um,
Gotcha.
so that was kind of the idea.
Gotcha.
There
Yeah,
was
I think I've
it
seen a
was
few of
like
those now pop up. This
yeah
kind of like open world multiplayer. You just click on a link and you're able to just jump right in. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and definitely seems
yeah
like a early pandemic uh, kind of hobby. That makes a ton of sense. Um, Actually, following up on that around Bun specifically, it was super exciting to actually get a kind of sneak peek into Bun. I know it's still a private repo. It's still in development. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what the plans are around the kind of next steps forward, either shipping it to more people. I know people can go to bun.sh and join the Discord and say that they want Bun in the Discord and get an invite, but what are the next steps look forward?
yeah. There's one more feature I'm working that I really want to have as part of the initial public release, and then I just need to write docs and things like that. The core thing it doesn't it's not like stable yet, but it works. Like you can use it in a lot of different Next.js projects. Um, uh, Basically, more concretely, the next step is like finish the feature, then make like a real website, uh, and then I'll just make it like a public repo.
Gotcha. Super exciting. And so when do you think that might come? Is that by the end of the year? Or is that kind of
I would
early
say it's
next
by
year?
the end of the year.
Cool. Very exciting. I'll definitely stay on the lookout for that. Um, and I'll give it a moment if anyone who's currently watching, if they want to drop in a question, either in the Discord or in the YouTube live chat. I'll give that a few minutes while I ask one more question. I've definitely been using Next for a little while, but I always still feel like I'm learning about features that had landed a while ago that I just completely forgot about. I'm curious for any of you if there's a feature that you feel like doesn't get enough um, it doesn't get highlighted enough that you end up really depending on.
I would say, hmm, I think just having, to be honest, my favorite Next.js feature is the file system routing.
Mm.
Um, I think a lot of people are fans of that, though.
It's kind of hard not to be. I'd say probably one that I forget about pretty often is get static paths. So I remember get static props, but actually being able to optimize for a pretty large, like an integration catalog or docs, being able to kind of statically generate a lot of that content, not just on a per page basis, but actually kind of mapping it out and throwing it together with something like a sitemap.xml, where you're able to just have a fully SEO ready web application built every time.
Yes.
Jared, any favorite Next features for you?
I would say the I really think the routing is great. It's usually so complicated to like it's usually just so complicated to do routing in a front end app. And like the file system is like file system as the interface is great.
Hmm.
Um, uh, that's probably my favorite Next feature in general.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah.
Gotcha. And then maybe taking zooming out a little bit from just Next itself, I'm curious if there's any other kind of projects, or I mean, I know Jared, you've been really deep in the Zig community. I'm curious if there's any other projects, languages, applications that you've come across that are kind of providing new inspiration for what you might want to work on next.
Was this a question for me
It's for anyone.
or just in general? Okay.
if you want to talk about Zig, it's kind of your opportunity to just to just kick
Yeah,
it
I mean,
off.
I think for Bun's ASD plugins, a big inspiration is also Babel macros. Um, uh, that like I think like before Babel macros, it was much harder to use Babel plugins because you had to configure the like .babel RC instead of just the import. Um, so I think that's like that was definitely a big inspiration. Um, uh, yeah,
Gotcha.
um, that's like
And
one thing I think about.
gotcha. Yeah, I definitely need to spend a little bit more time playing with new languages. I feel like it's been a little while since I've fallen off. Natalie, any new projects you've come across that inspire you to work on something new?
I think last night Radiohead have released a video game, and I just
Oh,
sort of
really?
reevaluated my whole life and work and where am I going and who am I. It was just the most incredible thing. I think what else? What else have I seen recently? I'm very interested in the things that have been announced by Cloudflare during the full stack week.
Hmm.
Sort of whenever I see things like that, I just want to tinker. Um, I think as well, honestly, after Next.js conf and yeah, kind of seeing all the announcements when I was speaking with Jeff Escalante from HashiCorp and seeing the kind of it's so geeky, but their documentation setup, and I just get so excited at the thought of writing some incredible docs and sort of making them as nice as possible. I think those are the things that are sort of piquing my interest at the moment.
Yeah, actually, in that vein, I've been playing around with DocuSource 2 quite a bit recently. Initially started out wanting to rewrite our own our own implementation of DocuSource using Next. Found that there's quite a bit of kind of meat on the bones that you need to kind of recreate, and started playing around with DocuSource, made it work, kind of play nicely between our Next app and this new Docs page, and being able to I think some new extension points, kind of like what we've talked about around Next Stories, being able to kind of combine the zero config nature that kind of unites a lot of the underlying Next library, the underlying libraries that power Next, um, doing a similar kind of approach with DocuSource, being able to, let's say, embed docs directly into the app has been something I've really been thinking about a lot. We definitely have quite a bit more work to do on our doc side, but I know we're just about getting to 4 p.m. I know it's very late for Natalie, and so I'm just going to thank everyone, thank all of our speakers for joining us, and thank everyone for watching. We'll post the videos online shortly afterwards, so you can watch them on demand, either the full live stream or you can just watch individual videos. And really excited for the next What's Next.js.
Thank you.
All right, bye everyone.